And with that, we are excited to be hosting John Evans as our guest speaker and David Redford as our moderator. We look forward to hearing John share his invaluable perspectives and insights from his career to date. David is a partner at Cassels. He's in the securities group and his practice focuses primarily on corporate and securities law, including capital markets, mergers and acquisitions, and finance transactions. And our guest today, Jonathan Evans, is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Lithium Americas Corporation. It's a company that's currently bringing to market 2 world-class lithium resources located in Argentina and in Nevada, United States. Formerly, he was the Chief Operating Officer of Diversitech, a portfolio company of private equity firms, Primera. John has had more than 25 years experience as an executive in management across businesses of various sizes and industries. After earning a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Clarkson University, Mr. Evans served in the United States Army as an armored cavalry officer. He subsequently earned a Master's of Science in Business. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator and our guest. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Well, why don't I kick things off? And before we get into the chat, I provide a little color on my experience with John. I've been corporate counsel for Lithium Americas for several years and worked with John for the last few years. And when I heard that he was being offered to speak at this session, I was quite excited about it. In my role as corporate counsel, I get to see a lot of interaction with senior management. It in many ways is a bit of a front row seat to the action at the senior management level. And I can say over the years, I have seen all manner of character and personality in that role. With John, you really get someone who shows the best of the leadership aspect of someone in the CEO position. You know, some of the stigmas or characters you would associate with CEO, big egos and intemperate behavior are not evident at all with John. He is really someone who leads by example, integrity, modest, great character, and so I think a great role model for you who are kind of going to be the next generation of leaders in the mining industry. So encourage you all to listen to what John has to say, and I'm interested to hear it as well. In terms of the layout, we've divided the Q&A into really 4 different buckets. We'll talk a bit about John's background, get into a discussion about Lithium Americas. No discussion these days would be complete without a little bit of talk about COVID, of course, and then a final section on the sector, lithium sector generally, and some other personal characteristics or background of John. So with that, John, why don't we start talking a bit about your background? Maybe you can tell us how you got into the industry and what really attracted you to the lithium industry.
Oh, thanks. And just tell everyone I'm really honored to be here, and you got me blushing with your description there, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I got into lithium about 13 years ago. I was moving. I worked for General Electric as my, I think, foundational career experience for 12, almost 13 years. It was a great experience, and the company the division I was in was sold, and I went on to another local public company, and I got a call from a recruiter. I've always been in the chemical or materials industries my whole career, and it was to run FMC Lithium, which I didn't know much about lithium except that it was an element. Of course, I knew it was in batteries, but it looked like a really unique opportunity. That at that time the industry was maybe a quarter or maybe less, maybe a fifth of the size it is today, and controlled by really 3 folks that are still around today in various forms. But it was very global and seemed very interesting, so I took the opportunity and went, and have never looked back. We'll talk about my experiences. I guess I've been in lots of different places, but it was one of the best experiences I had running that division for almost 5 years at a time when the industry was a lot smaller and kind of interesting in terms of how it operated.
Well, I think that is one characteristic about the lithium business that a lot of people on the line here that are involved directly in mining might not appreciate. But lithium really is a merger of mining and chemicals is a huge part of the the focus and growth of the industry. And you coming from that background offers maybe a little different perspective. In terms of the next question, maybe you can talk a bit about some of the highlights of your career.
The experience at General Electric was great, and that company's been through a lot of different phases, and it's not in a very good phase now. It was one of those places that was a blue chip place to work, and it was a real foundational experience at an early age where they really valued allowing you to jump into the deep water, and it's a bit of sink or swim, but letting you do things that maybe you weren't quite prepared for yet as part of learning experiences. So I got to do a lot. I moved a lot. I lived overseas, traveled a lot, met a lot of different folks, and it really opened my eyes up and prepared me. And I think it got me comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I'll talk about that, I think, later on when you ask me some things, lessons learned. It's followed me my whole career. So moving from company to company, sort of started off there with being moved through jobs, I would say fairly quickly, but maybe you weren't allowed to sit back and enjoy the fruits of your success for a real long period of time. You fix the issue and you execute it, and now it's on to the next thing. And I think that's that ability to be able to pivot has been helpful throughout my whole career, whether I've been in the pharmaceutical industry, I was in the lithium industry, I've been in agrochemicals, and I've been actually in industrial products. So actually for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning industry, which seems like a complete pivot, but a lot of the foundational skills and toolkit that I developed over that 20 plus years really, really helped. And then also being in public companies and being in private equity for 6 years, that was a great experience. I think I learned more about running a business working in private equity, in that you didn't have the corporate functions in the background that you just sort of all relied on. You really had to understand how the income statement and balance sheet worked, how to manage cash, and I think that prepared me well for the role I'm in now.
Good, great. Why don't we move on? Your time in the U.S. Army, maybe you can provide some takeaways from that experience for the people here. Yeah,
that was a really good experience for me. I was very young. I was 21, graduated from college, and it was right when the Gulf War was ending. And again, I was an engineering undergraduate, so typically the job market, and it was very good. And I went a different direction. I went into the military because it paid for my college. I had a full scholarship, and that's the way you pay it back. I was put on active duty and was on M1A1 Abrams tanks. And I think that was an interesting experience for me, and also one where I learned a lot of aspects of, I think I've carried through today. Number one, rank doesn't equal being a leader. So just because you're called the CEO or a manager, being a leader is something different. So leading by example, rolling your sleeves up, exhibiting the right behaviors, treating your employees right. I learned a lot of that in the military, and that even in the job I had, I was a platoon leader and I was a company executive officer. But at the end of the day, I also had a bunch of tanks. I had a couple of crewmen. When it broke, everybody was equal. Doesn't matter what rank you were, you're all out there doing the work together. And I think that egalitarianism is carried me through the rest of my career, where there's nothing beneath you, especially if you're a leader. You need to lead by example and work with your employees closely. And I think the other was on a socioeconomic level. I worked with a broad cross section of folks from every aspect and walk of life you could imagine. And I think I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, Saratoga Springs. It's a nice place. If you ever watched the show Glory Years or The Wonder Years, it was kind of like that. And I had folks that had been from all walks of life, some of them not the greatest backgrounds. And I got to really know and appreciate those folks, but also learn how to work with folks across a broad spectrum like that without any preconceived notions. And I think that's the way I've been that way ever since through that.
Right. I don't know if we ever talked about that. We're a bit of brothers in arms. I was an infantry officer in the Canadian Army for years.
I know that. You're a leg.
Yeah. And just to add, my experience was similar. The other takeaway that I really remember from that is responsibility, right? Like, you were responsible for the people in your organization, your subordinates. No matter what happened, no excuses. You take that on yourself personally and for your unit, etc. And that's carried with me throughout my career, and I'm sure it's the same with you.
Yeah, you're responsible for them 24/7, even in their private life, which is much different than in work. But I think that caring attitude and type of relationship, I think, means a lot in the workplace if you bring it with you now forward in public work.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about your transition and becoming CEO. How did this come about, and at what point in your career did you make that jump to CEO?
So really the official CEO title, when I went into private equity, it was always with the idea at some point I would be moved into a CEO role, whether that was at Arista Life Science or at Diversitech. And for one reason or other, the businesses were sold or strategy changed. It didn't happen. And that was fine, actually, for the mission and so forth. I didn't get upset over that. In the case of Lithium Americas, I knew Tom and John actually going back since 2012. We met, and I knew Cacciari Rose because, to be frank, Magna and Mitsubishi actually approached us to see the viability of the asset, to see if we were interested in participating. So I knew the asset pretty well. Actually, I know Thacker Pass pretty well that long, and we kept a relationship. We kept in touch with each other. I was asked to join the board in 2017 as they were wanting to bring folks on that had real industry experience, lithium industry experience, but also chemical industry experience. And then through the course of that, Tom was planning his retirement, and we had several discussions on, well, perhaps maybe you'd like to step away from what you're doing. And while that was a hard decision because I had a really good job and really enjoyed where I was working, it was an easy one too, because I believed in what the company was doing. And it's a sector that I have a lot of passion about in terms of what we're doing. And we're part of something bigger than us. So I joined in, was it the summer of 2018, and here we are now, and couldn't be happier. I mean, I think we have one of the best, if not the best.
So there's a Q&A function. I've got one question that's come in that before we get too far on, maybe I'll circle back to it. The question relates to your opportunity to travel overseas. Any specific place or experience that resonates with you or stuck with you that helped you advance your career?
Yes, I lived in Germany for about 2 years. It's been like 20 years ago now. And my wife and I had a blast. My daughter was just a baby. And I think living overseas and seeing your own country from afar, reading news from afar, and being exposed to, Europe is, Canada and the US are these massive countries, and you have all these different cultures that are in a smaller place in Europe. So you get the Dutch and the Germans, the French, the Danish. I loved it. And I have a passion and yearning to want to learn their history, but also you were able to travel over there and go to all these places that none of the tourists went to, because you never had time if you go there for a week or two or for Europe. So I got to see so much. So that was a great experience that sort of really opened me up to want to do more. And then working for General Electric, actually throughout my career, I probably spent 6 or 8 months of my life in China, India. I've been to Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Western and Southern Africa, several countries in South America. It's spanned the globe, and I love it. And I think that's important in that we live in a multicultural world, even in our own countries. And I think it really helps your management style, but I also think it gives you empathy and opens you up a little bit more to understand folks from a different perspective. And I really learned it living in Europe. And I was over there, the whole Clinton crisis with Monica Lewinsky was going on and so forth. The French were like, what the hell? we had this happen all the time. It was actually kind of hilarious to watch it from overseas at the time, and that much to do in the US about really nothing from the rest of the world. So that was, I'd say that started it all.
Right. Great. Moving on to the next one. Anything from earlier in your career that you think was potentially a turning point or something that stuck with you that you would like to share with the members?
So when I worked at General Electric, it was a great place to work, and I had done very, very well. And I had gotten to they had certain like career bands. I had gotten to a certain level in the company that you're sort of it. You're at this, I think, the top 500 people in the company. Your career is managed out of corporate headquarters in Fairfield. My father, to be candid, worked for General Electric for 27 years. He's a PhD or a chemist. And about 6 months after I got to that level, I got called into an office in Fairfield, Connecticut, their headquarters, and was told to sign a bunch of papers from a bunch of lawyers, and was then told that I'm going to help them sell the division that I work in. And that's what happened. They sold one half to Sabic, so Saudi Arabia Basic Industries, and the other one to Apollo, which is a private equity company. It was my first and not a very good experience with private equity in the beginning. And it felt like the wind was knocked out of me, because I had this whole career plan, this whole progression of jobs and opportunities as part of this massive multinational company. And I had to make a decision. I didn't want to stay because I didn't believe in the strategy that they had laid out. I was on the private equity side. So I left. And it was a really uncomfortable feeling to start all over again. I had 2 young kids. We had just moved to Connecticut about a year earlier. My wife's about ready to stab me for, wanting to move again and so forth. And I said once before, as we were talking, that you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because that's the way life is. And it was the first time where your perfectly laid plans were jeopardized, and you have to make decisions in life and move on. And I think be comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of unknowns out there. And I think that's guided me through the rest of my career, where you get comfortable in not having all the answers, and that things are going to change, and you can have all the plans in the world, but a lot of cases you're going to throw them in the garbage because the situation is going to change.
Of course. Well, why don't we transition to a discussion about Lithium Americas then? Let's start off with the biggest challenges that you've faced running the company. Maybe you can provide us a little context on that.
I think we just came through a really difficult period in the industry the last 3 years, where there was an overhang of too much capacity, perhaps a little too much exuberance a few years ago. And on top of that, we had COVID. So I think the last 3 years have been a real challenge for not only for us, but maybe more so for companies like Lithium Americas, where yes, we're public, but we operate very much like venture capital. I mean, we're managing cash, so we don't run out. And I mean, David, you've worked with us on several deals that have come up last minute, and all sorts of unusual stuff that we've had to do for, on one, to advance the strategy of the company, which is to get these 2 assets built, but number 2, survival, and especially with COVID. That was like, I lived through the dot-com bubble, the great financial crisis, when I ran FMC Lithium, all these things. You think you've seen everything, but we had this was completely out of the blue. And I think those have been the biggest challenges for us, is to be able to persevere and survive and come out of it stronger, while still advancing our strategy, which is to get these 2 assets into production. It's been a lot of work. This is the first Christmas, I think, that we haven't had some sort of fire drill going on. It was the best Christmas I've had in 3 years. It was nice, and hopefully we'll have another Christmas like that this year.
Yep, no, it's been a wild ride, that's for sure. Well, maybe could, and this is perhaps in some ways a similar topic, but speak to the challenges of developing and financing a mining project at the stage of Lithium Americas.
Yeah, I think for us, you've got different geographies. So dealing in Argentina is much different than the US or Canada. That dealing with more of a emerging market, I'll say, a government's or governments down there that present lots of different challenges. Human capital is a real challenge for us in that the company's grown quite a bit from the time I joined to where we are today, and finding the right people for the right job. It's really critical in some of the key roles that the hire is really bespoke. It's been a challenge to find the right folks, and sometimes the first person we hired didn't work out too well, and then changing the tires on the car as the car is going down the road makes it even more difficult because of the schedule we have and of the way we financed at least the Argentina project, where you have limits. We're not generating revenue yet. We don't have free cash flow, so you have real hard limits on what you can do in terms of a time frame. So I think both of those things make life difficult for us. We had a change in government in Argentina, which was a real change, kind of back to the future. COVID on top of that, which has delayed our project, and we've learned to become epidemiologists and logisticians at the same time. And then the people part of it, finding the right people and adding them in a timely period and getting them up to speed, but also adding them in such a way where it doesn't disrupt, I think is all a challenge for us, or it's been a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe we can speak a bit more about Argentina. I mean, it's it's a remote jurisdiction from the Canadian perspective, but obviously critical for the company. And you talk about some of the challenges and perhaps some of the benefits of operating there.
Challenges, there's a multitude. I guess I have a comfort level with it just because I've dealt with it before under a previous administration, whereas we were quite happy when Macri was president, and now the administration there, it's moved a little bit back, but at the same time, I think it's still better than what it was perhaps when I was running FMC and had Humber Marto there back 2008 through 2013. It's important to get the right folks on the ground, so setting up the right folks that you trust, having the right reporting metrics, and ensuring that there's a lot of transparency. What can tend to happen is folks like to manage things locally, and fires can grow very quickly and get out of control, and it's impossible to manage an asset or a project like that from 5,000 or 6,000 miles away unless you have good relationships, number one, but number two, transparent communication and good ways to measure progress, a system or a process. And we've had some hiccups, and I had hiccups when I was at FMC as well. I think we've got the right mix of people and process in there today, but it's not one of those types of things where, yes, I could hop on a plane tonight and be in Argentina in the morning, but you can't manage stuff that far away remotely. It's really critical to have people you trust empowered on the ground there, and management systems so that you can control the progression of the project there and understand what's going on. The other piece, I think, is to accept that things are done differently depending upon where you are in the world, whether it's China, whether it's Argentina, whether it's France. There are cultural differences in communication, in government rules, and there's a story when I was at FMC. The Argentine government had suspended our tax stability certificate, and the CEO of FMC wanted to file a lawsuit, whereas my general counsel counseled against that because the lawsuit was going to be filed against basically the president of Argentina. Probably not something you want to do if you're operating in the country. And it was very much that US or North American centric. We have laws here and this is the way things go. Well, it's a little different. I think you're going to have to change your strategy a little bit down there. I think you can still get to the same end, but maybe that's not the best communication style or first move you want to make if you want to engage with the government to fix an issue.
Yeah, I would generally find suing someone that you want to have help you is not going to often work in that jurisdiction. Sure. Well, why don't we transition to Nevada then? Talk about the challenges and benefits of developing a project in Nevada.
Yeah, so I think the jurisdiction is great. I'm very proud of the team there. It's grown quite a bit over the last 6 months. I think we have critical mass. It's exciting out of both projects, I mean, I love both projects. I've known both for a long time. I knew Thacker Pass when it was Western Lithium. It was the wrong recipe and the wrong time, but always knew the asset, just like the green bushes in Australia used to be the marginal asset. There's just a huge potential in Thacker Pass, and I know there's a commitment and there's a move in North America to establish portions of the supply chain locally, whether that be critical minerals in the US and Canada, battery manufacturing, cathode manufacturing, not to be completely independent, but to balance supply chains out where you have some ability to de-risk. That's really coming, and it's exciting to see the policy support. Today, happy Earth Day to everybody. There was a huge announcement by the Biden administration. I know Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada is doing the same. There's a lot of support that we've never seen before out of our governments, which typically tend to be 2 steps behind Asian governments and maybe even the EU in some cases, where I think the timing is really unique. And it's just be really exciting to be part of something where you're helping address a major issue, which is climate change. You're bringing good paying jobs to regions that need economic development. And you're helping your country out too. It's what gets me excited, you know, coming into or being at work every day that you're working on stuff bigger than you.
You know, that's interesting. I mean, you started talking about Nevada and Thacker Pass, and it evolved into a bigger discussion about, you know, the political and I guess generally the environment in the U.S. for the lithium industry. And you know, my observation is that those two are interrelated. That, you know, Thacker Pass is an important piece of that puzzle, and maybe you could talk a bit about where it fits within the U.S. kind of lithium future from your perspective.
Yeah, so we've passed a major with the record of decision in January, which was a culmination of a decade of work, some of which was done by Western Lithium, it started at least, and then finished by our own team. It's been a long time coming, and I think Thacker Pass will play a key piece in the strategy to provide high quality lithium chemicals. There'll be other projects too. We're not the only one. They'll need to have multiple. If you buy in, and I do, that the industry is going to go from 400,000 tons today, which I'll qualify by, when I left the industry was 130,000 tons, and that was 7 years ago. It's grown to 400. It'll be 450 this year, probably at the end of the year. It's going to be 1 million tons by 2025. How do you bring that much capacity online? And people are scouring the world now looking for economic deposits. But even if you find them, it takes a decade for a greenfield. It takes 2 to 3 years for a brownfield. It's become urgent at this point. And certainly from a North American supply chain standpoint, I think Thacker Pass has the ability to be the first, or if not one of the first, to get into production. And I think that helps kind of close that loop where you've got these battery factories going in with the lithium piece. Now you can start to fill in the middle of the donut, where you can bring some cathode precursor and cathode manufacturing here, which Panasonic does to some degree with Tesla. So it's exciting to be part of something that could be a real catalyst for the industry, for jobs, and most importantly for climate change and addressing it in the world.
Very good. Another coming at Thacker Pass from another angle. You know, Cochari in Argentina, you financed and developed it really through a joint venture. Would you take the same approach with Thacker, or what's the mix of getting that through to development?
We have a lot of optionality now, given I think the opportunistic tapping of the capital markets we did in October and November. So our cash position, if you would have told me a year ago that we would have over $500 million of cash plus the more than enough credit available on our senior credit facility in Argentina, I would have said you're crazy. So it's really, like I say, go back to plans are kind of useless. Planning is everything. We've always planned to get both these assets into production. but our optionality now is really broad. So I think, yes, we would be willing to do a partnership. I don't think we're interested in selling a majority of it, that's for sure. And the structure of that partnership, I think, can be different now. It could be around certain aspects of the project that perhaps somebody who's interested in getting involved in the project in some way can bring their expertise to the table. Somebody who's companies that are basic in perhaps sulfur or sulfuric acid, or are big in logistics, or have experience building large chemical complexes. The array of companies we're talking to run the gamut from OEMs to oil and gas to chemical corporations to battery companies. And the types of ways we can structure a partnership, I think, are vastly different than in Cauchari, where we started off as a company and sold half of it for, what was it, $50 million or something like that to get into business. It sort of morphed, but the company was in a much different stage then versus now, where we can bring our own money to the table. Plus, we have a much larger technical team. The team in Nevada is 35 folks at least. I think we have more chemical engineers there than anywhere else in the company. It's exciting in that we have just a broader range of options that we can approach with folks, which I think at the end of the day is going to bring the structure there is going to be really interesting for us, for the industry too.
And that's something that, again, getting to this distinction between lithium and perhaps more conventional mining projects, the chemical and the integration into the battery supply chain, I think creates a lot of different potential options. It's a lot more diverse than I think you'd find for a more traditional mining project. And finally, on Lithium Americas, where do you see it among its competitors, and where do you think it will be in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think we're poised to enter into the production ranks and be amongst the group there. I mean, if you look at us versus, there was just a merger that was done the other day. Once we get into production next year, our half alone will be larger than Orocobre. And Thacker Pass, if you look at what the potential is there, the permit is up to 60,000 tons, phase 1, 30 to 35,000 tons. Fast forward 3 years from now, we should be starting production there. So we could be a top 5 company in 3 or 4 years around the world. With, I think, in the background, we've got folks like Tom Benson and others that are scouring the US and Canada for potential new sources of sedimentary deposits or spodumene. And then you're building this bench of technical expertise that can look at understanding these deposits and understand, based on the quality and the impurities, to your point about chemical conversion, how do I get that and move it through to a quality product at the end of the line that can go into a battery? So, because they're separate and distinct pieces, but they're interrelated. So I'm excited, and I think we'll be a well-known player in a few years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if we put it in context, you said the market might be 400,000 tons now, and so if you're producing 20,000 from Cauchari and 30 from Thacker, 50,000 tons, you've got like 10% of the market. Back of the envelope, if based on production in a couple of years, and obviously there's lots of other variables to that, but it'll be significant. Yeah. Okay, well, we're starting to run a little short of time. I'm going to skip over the COVID part, and we can circle back to it after if we still have a bit of time. But why don't we talk a bit more about the other items that we decided to canvass in this. And so we've touched on this a little bit already, actually. The first one is share your views on the current lithium market and where it's going over the next several years.
Yeah, so I really think now, and you've heard it before, and this time is different. I really think it is, given the amount of investment that's been announced and committed by major automotive manufacturers, backed by policy that's been enacted already in China, but now more so in Europe, and also you're seeing it in the US and in Canada. I think the industry is poised for really explosive growth, double-digit, high teens growth for the next foreseeable future. I think that supply will be chasing demand, just given the long fuse to develop projects, and also the reluctance for private capital to come off the sideline to fund a lot of these projects. it will come. They always wait too late, or everybody's so focused on sort of short-term pricing. Pricing is going to stay elevated and at an elevated level for quite a long period of time in order to incentivize current producers or new producers or potential future producers even to get into the industry. That we always heard $12,000 a ton is really important to offer enough sufficient return on capital for folks to want to invest, because these are expensive projects. A typical one is $500 million. A spodumene asset in Australia, all the way to conversion, is over $1 billion. You need deep pockets to do this. I actually think you'll see larger companies getting involved in this. We talk about the big companies today, but they're actually not that big. Albemarle is not that big of a company from a chemical company perspective if you compare it to a BASF or Dow. Those types of resources to be able to fund large projects and multiple projects are going to be required, I think, to get the industry where it's going to need to go. And as it continues to grow, as the year continues to progress this year and next year, you'll see more and more folks that have been nibbling around the edges that I think will commit and get involved. And it's exciting if you look at the battery technology. You've got lots of innovations on the anode side, going to graphite, silicon, all silicon, and then solid state batteries, what that does to charging times, what it does to energy density itself, different chemistries like lithium iron phosphate, which you'll see a lot more now in entry level cars, where the safety aspects of it are superior to high nickel in terms of catching fire at all, actually, if the battery's punctured. So there's really a lot of investment and innovation that's happening at the same time, which I think will, by 2025, it'll feel a lot bigger than it is today. Where even if it feels big today, that's one thing, but this is still the beginning. We're in like the second inning right now.
Right. So why don't we take a step back and talk about kind of bigger picture company building and career type topics. And we do have some Q&A coming in. I think I'll run through a few of these questions because they are similar, and then pick up the Q&A questions as well. So first off, what do you believe are the keys to success and culture to build a successful company?
And I think our company, like candor and transparency from the top, everybody understanding the mission, getting folks aligned. I think, as you and I touched around, David, as well, it's that leaders, it's being a leader and a manager are two different things. So leading by examples, I think that's important for the top leadership of the company to roll their sleeves up, to communicate and be open door with everybody. We have a relatively flat organization in Lithium Americas, which works out really well. I take emails from everybody. I don't have an administrator. Now that could maybe be difficult if we had 10,000 employees in the company, but I don't know. I've had many more people working for me than I do now. And I think the best strategy has always been management by walking around. I used to love walking around at plants around dinner time or the evening when things quieted down, where you can talk to folks, all folks in all parts of the organization to get a sense of what's going on and to be available and open to hear people's ideas, especially people that might be afraid to speak in a group to folks. So I think culture-wise, I think that's really important, to have that ability to be able to speak up and we have a flat organization with a lot of open communication and alignment.
Okay. So if you could go back and give career advice to your younger self, what would you say?
I'd go back, the one I learned, that big lesson about just be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's life. The best laid plans usually are going to go awry. You need to be agile and be ready to pivot. The best opportunities in life, you're going to get that way. You can either, I believe in progress over perfection, taking action. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's better than the alternative, which is doing nothing because you're afraid you're going to get in trouble. You need to continue to move ahead in the company, and I believe that too as a manager. And you had said that yourself from the military. It's our job to protect. as well, especially folks that take the initiative. If the intent is good, that type of behavior needs to be supported. I think the second thing is patience. I've really been an impatient person, and you need to allow time for execution, and step back and let people do their job. And I'll say this as a CEO, I don't have the best ideas nearly any time. The best ideas are the ones that come from the collective group, and being open to suggestions and to ideas. I think that's really important, where you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. It's actually better to be the person that listens the most, because at the end of the day, you actually hear the best ideas.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pick up some of the Q&A questions. Make sure we get through them before we run out of time. So one question: any advice for young engineers thinking about work in natural resources?
Yeah, I'm glad that folks are, number one, that we have engineers, and I think the opportunities are going to be tremendous in the future. I think where we're going with a greening of the economy offers a opportunity, beyond the traditional, to get involved. Whether it's, look at all the minerals that are going to be required for this transformation, whether it's copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium. You can be part of something that is growing at a faster rate than traditional industries, and I think be part of something too that can be done right. I think the focus around ESG and around sustainability have brought a lot of good dimensions to how projects are planned and run now. And I think we have a shortage of engineering talent and technical talent globally, especially in the US and Canada. It's tough to find good people. So, keep yourself open for opportunities. Don't be afraid. Raise your hand. If something seems cool, go for it. I think the industry is looking for bright folks that want opportunity, especially engineers.
Yeah, I think the world always needs engineers. So that's yeah, absolutely. Okay, next one. Any clear challenges and benefits that stood out when you took on the role as CEO of a public company relative to working in the private equity space?
Oh, yeah, I miss private equity sometimes, so I don't have to keep calling you David for, do we have to have the disclosure of this or that? So, so on one hand, I like a public company that we have the ability to engage with the marketplace and the ability to tap capital markets to raise cash. It's more difficult to do that in private equity, because the company is highly levered, and operating in that environment, even though you don't have to spend time with analysts and so forth, you have to be really careful on how you run the business, because literally, when I say highly leveraged, your debt to EBITDA could be 5 or 6 times. I mean, not that you're going to run out of payroll money, but you could. So you have to walk a fine line in private equity, which is a price to pay for simplicity and speed. Board meetings are a snap. The chairman of the board is somebody appointed by the PE sponsor. You can make decisions really, really fast, but your margin of error typically tends to be pretty small. And speed you really need, because you have to transfer the company relatively quickly, because there's a fuse on that investment too. Whereas in public, I mean, to be blunt, it's a pain in the ass many days. I don't like dealing with retail shareholders with 300 shares complaining why we're not tweeting news every single day, or dealing with the TSX or SEC. But that being said, the markets are there for a reason, where, look, we raised $500 million and have positioned the company to really succeed in the future, which would have been really difficult to do that in private equity market, and it would have been really expensive, because it would have been high yield debt with a lot of strings attached to it. So there's pros and cons of both.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I promised a question or two about COVID, and why don't we get into that? So how has COVID impacted your business, and what have been the biggest challenges, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, running the project in Argentina. I mean, the US and Canada were simpler. Argentina, we literally had to suspend the project twice. The vaccination rate is low. The infrastructure development is at a lower than the US or Canada. So we've had to do a lot of things on our own. Our medical advisor is the same that the president of Argentina uses, Dr. Lopez. We were the first to bring in Abbott antigen testing. We've had to add 650 additional dormitories. I think every temporary dorm space in Argentina we've probably contracted and brought to site. The bio protocols, working closely with the provincial government, and then scheduling, moving people up under social distancing guidelines, serving food at the facility at the Solar. Every aspect of life had to be replanned in relatively short order, and it impacted our schedule. I mean, at the end of the day, it'll be 6-7 months, maybe a little longer, because we're going to have to operate the way we're doing now all the way until next June, where I know in the US and Canada, we're not happy with vaccination rates. In Argentina, we've been told that we should expect to be operating under biocontrols until we're completed with the project at the end of the first half next year. So it's a long road, and it's been a difficult one that I think we've mastered, but you have to be really vigilant with it, as we all know, because outbreaks can occur very, very quickly, and safety is paramount. And thankfully, we've had cases. We had cases last summer. We didn't have any serious hospitalizations or intubations or whatever else, but just people getting ill and having to be away from their families and scared, especially last year when a lot less was known about the virus. It's really tough.
Of course. And maybe just talking generally, are there any lessons learned because of the COVID pandemic that you would kind of want to take away from as a general sense?
Yeah, I guess now when you look at planning scenarios, this is one of those black swan events that you probably would have never put in your scenario list. But I think the way we set the schedule up, we never anticipated anything like this. And then I think moving, when we first reacted, we were a little slow. Again, trying to be perfect rather than versus progress, or perfection over progress. My lesson learned there is I think we would have probably acted quicker. It might have been a little bit messier, as opposed to trying to get the science and so forth. We didn't have all the data. Nobody did. And actually waiting is the worst thing you can do, especially in the case of a virus, because it just continues to spread. So that was a lesson learned for me. We probably should have moved without regard so much to trying to get every medical opinion we could in the world, because collectively, nobody really was an expert.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Moving to a little different topic. What qualities stand out in your mind for a CFO in the mining industry? So thinking about that particular role in the organization, and how you look at someone who's successful in that.
For the companies, look at a CFO as a right-hand person, so kind of like president, vice president in roles, like a government role. They need to be able to speak on behalf of the CEO and be probably better informed on some of the more arcane details, especially like I can answer lots of finance questions, but Edward can certainly do a better justice than I can. I think you need to be intellectually curious. You need to understand the inner workings of the company. He or one of the persons on his staff sits on every project review. They understand what's going on in the company from an operational standpoint as well as I do, and dig in on, especially for mining projects. You really need a good CFO and finance team to monitor the CapEx and your project spend and your cash burn. It's critical. And it goes back to, like I said, Argentina being so far away, having the right controls and transparency in place, because if you don't, things can get covered up and forgotten about and show up later as a major problem. So I think CFO role to me is absolutely critical and paramount in terms of somebody that I would view, and I think any CEO views as a partner And that person needs to be as involved in the day-to-day and understand the operational component as much as they know the inner workings of the company, whether it be the balance sheet or taxes or anything else. It's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. And on top of that, since we're public, Edward and I can go to jail. So you really have to know the background of what's going on and be willing to sign your name on it, because there's under penalty of law. It's that serious.
Yeah, I would say, from my own observations over the years, the CFO really bridges the technical with the business side, right? Like the really successful ones who earn the trust of the management and the board are the ones that can, communicate the business side well, not only the financial, take that information, communicate it, and have the judgment and, the interpersonal to, support the business objectives of the company, right? It's you assume they have the technical background for the financial. It's kind of that next step that really, adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, and then last question we've got in, which is, I think the timing is going to be just about right. What is your number one piece of advice for those earlier in their career who are looking to build their career in the mining sector?
I definitely stay open to new opportunities, especially if you're young and mobile. Look for roles. I always viewed my career like a painting, almost a numbered painting, where you're trying to fill in all the different squares with different colors to try to get a diversity of experience. I would look for roles that fill needs that you need to get filled to get to where you want to go in your career, whether you want to be an operations lead, whether you want to be a CFO of a company, a general counsel. Don't be afraid to get into areas that you don't necessarily know. Look at it in terms of what it brings you. Be comfortable with the uncomfortable, where you're not going to know everything. You might not know anything at first, but trust in the toolkit and the skill set that you have that can be applied to a different part of a company or a different functional company, or even a different culture, to try to gain those types of experiences that you need to propel you along and build the foundation that you need, or that you think you're going to need to get to whatever role or goal that you have.
Okay, and I think we got time for one more. So, taking the general that you've talked about, when we talk about, the current situation and advice for young professionals coming up now, and COVID and the uncertainty, do you have any advice for the YMP members for how to manage their career right now during these uncertain times?
Yeah, my hope is that we're all vaccinated soon. I admit I'm fully vaccinated. I think it's going to hopefully important for us to, I always think there'll be some hybrid work, which I actually like. I think it's good that, look, I'm going to work from home today because I'm getting my apartment painted or my car fixed or whatever else. But you have to over communicate now in the current environment where we're working via Zoom, and I haven't been in Vancouver in, what is it, since December 2019 now. Somehow to bridge the gap. It's temporary. Life certainly isn't going to go on this way forever. So I think in the meantime, over communicate. It can be exhausting. You need to step away from your work. You need your own real time. You have to take real vacation during all of this, but in the interim, we have to deal with what we have to deal with, and I believe by the fall, at the latest, at least we'll be getting back together, at least on some social level, where I don't know what that looks like. Our governments will figure that out, but we're not meant as a species to work like this. It's impossible. It's hard to do deals. It's hard to, especially coming into a new company, when you can't literally interact with somebody and look at their body language. It's really hard over a venue like this. So for the time being, take advantage at least of the systems where it's easy to reach out, it's easy to chat with people all day, it's easy to talk, even if it's virtually, to make up for some of that. And hopefully, soon by the fall, at least we're back to some level of normalcy. I think that the employment environment will be great because look in the natural resources sector, the price of oil is going to be $70 or $80 a barrel by the end of the year. Jet fuel is already people are starting to move around. The economy is starting to grow again, and I think there's going to be a real need where companies maybe have held back on hiring. Whereas we get into the second half of the year, that's really going to accelerate, and there'll be a lot of opportunities out there. And for folks that are opportunistic, I think it'll be a great time to strike out and do something new with a fresh start on the back of a global economy, which is going to start accelerating again. So I'm really optimistic.
Excellent. Oh, I see Laura.
Hi, thank you both. Hi, I would just like to thank John for his time and David for leading the conversation. It's clear to everyone that battery metals and lithium in particular are undergoing rapid growth, and we're so grateful for your insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Pleasure.
YMP Vancouver, supported by KPMG, Cassels, Integra, New Placer Dome, Equinox Gold, Verify, and Solaris, and the YMP global sponsor is Rio Tinto. Without our sponsors, events like this would not be possible. So a big thank you to everyone for their continued support.